He froze with the chainsaw still humming, the sound vibrating up his arms like a warning he didn't understand yet. His phone buzzed in his chest pocket for the third time, and he ignored it, eyes locked on the dark lump wedged where two thick branches met. It looked wrong. Not a bird's nest. Not a burrow he'd seen 100 times. Something smoother. Almost like it had been placed there. "Cal, you good?" His foreman yelled from the skidder, voice muffled by distance and engine noise. Caleb didn't answer. A cold cup of Starbucks sat on the stump behind him, forgotten, the lid half popped from where he'd set it down too hard. His glove trembled as he reached up and tapped the lump with the tip of his saw's bar. It didn't sound like wood. It sounded hollow. He swallowed, throat tight, and made the cut. The tree shifted with a groan, slow and heavy, and as it started to lean, the lump split open like it had been waiting for air. Something pale flashed inside. Caleb's stomach dropped so fast he felt dizzy. And then he saw what it was. Not something alive. Not anything that could bite or sting. But still, he stood there shocked, because what spilled out didn't belong in a tree. Not here. Not in his life. Not when he was already hanging on by a thread. Caleb Mercer lived outside Eugene, Oregon, in a rental house that used to be somebody's dream. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, faded gray paint, a yard that was mostly moss and wet leaves. He'd moved in after the divorce because it was what he could afford on his logging pay, and because it was close enough to the yard that he could be on the road before sunrise without waking anyone up. Not that anyone lived there with him anymore. The house was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. The silence had corners. It held memories. His ex-wife, Jenna, used to hum while she made coffee. Their daughter, Lila, used to run through the hallway in socks, sliding and laughing until Caleb told her to be careful, and she rolled her eyes like he was the most dramatic person alive. Now the hallway was just a hallway. No laughter. No little shoes by the door. No sticky handprints on the fridge. Jenna hadn't moved far. She lived 30 minutes away in a newer townhouse with better schools nearby. Lila stayed with Caleb every other weekend, plus Wednesday dinners when the schedule worked. But lately, the schedule didn't work. The logging company had cut hours when contracts slowed. Then they'd brought in overtime on the weeks they did have work because they were trying to meet deadlines with fewer crews. Caleb said yes to every shift. He told himself it was for Lila. 4 child support. 4 gas. 4 groceries. For the old Tacoma that needed a new transmission he couldn't pay for yet. But if he was honest, he also said yes because the woods were easier than the house. In the woods, nobody asked him how he was holding up. Nobody looked at him like he was fragile. The trees didn't care if he talked or stayed quiet. He could be useful without being vulnerable. Still, there were mornings when the exhaustion felt like it had weight. It wasn't just tired. It was the kind of tired that lived in his bones. The kind that made him stare at the ceiling at 3:12 a.m., jaw clenched, heart racing like something bad was about to happen even when nothing was happening at all. His therapist called it anxiety with grief. Caleb called it being broke and alone. He'd started seeing the therapist after Lila asked him one night, very casually, why he looked sad all the time. Kids said things like that the way they said the sky was blue. No cruelty. Just noticing. After that, Caleb started noticing too. He noticed how he barely laughed anymore. How he avoided mirrors. How he kept his phone on silent because he didn't want to feel that little jolt of hope that maybe Jenna was texting something kind, or Lila was asking to come over, only to see it was a bank alert or a reminder that his credit card payment was late. He noticed how he'd started eating dinner standing up, like he didn't deserve a chair. On the drive to work each day, he passed the same strip mall with the same bright signs: gym, vape store, a sandwich shop, a Starbucks that always had a line even at 5:45 a.m. He'd started stopping there because he needed something warm in his hands. Because the cashier, a college kid with a nose ring, always said, "Morning man," like Caleb mattered for 5 seconds. He'd take his coffee and sit in his truck for a minute before heading to the yard. Sometimes he'd scroll through photos of Lila when she was smaller. Sometimes he'd just stare at the steering wheel until the caffeine kicked in and he remembered he had a job to do. Today was supposed to be a normal day. A ridge line job. Cold air, wet ground, the smell of sap and diesel, the steady rhythm of work that made time pass without him thinking too hard. And then he saw the lump. It was halfway up a Douglas fir, a dark bulge where the trunk split into heavy branches. He'd noticed it because the bark around it looked scraped, like something had been rubbed against it over and over. Caleb had been doing this long enough to know what trees looked like when something was off. Sometimes it was rot. Sometimes it was pests. Sometimes it was just nature being weird. But this looked like it didn't belong. He climbed onto the base of the slope, boots sinking into damp needles. He looked up, squinting through the gray morning. The lump wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't wood grain. It was like a patch of the tree had been filled. Caleb's foreman, Rick, waved from the skidder. "You want me to send someone else on that one?" Rick called. "Looks awkward." Caleb shook his head, forcing his voice to work. "I got it." He didn't know why he insisted. Pride, maybe. Or the need to feel in control of something. He positioned his saw, checked his footing, and started the cut. The chainsaw's roar was familiar, almost comforting. He felt the vibration, smelled the sharp tang of fresh sap as the blade bit in. The tree groaned when it started to give, that deep sound of fibers breaking, a reminder that even the strongest things had limits. As it leaned, the lump split. At first he thought it was just a hollow pocket, maybe an old wound in the tree filled with decayed matter. Then something slid out and hit the ground with a thud that was too solid. Caleb killed the saw. Silence rushed in like water. He stepped closer, heart hammering, and knelt in the wet needles. What lay there wasn't an animal. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't anything dangerous in the obvious way. It was a small, sealed metal box, scuffed and damp, the kind you'd keep in a tool shed. And taped to the top, with old yellowing duct tape, was a single folded paper. Caleb's fingers went numb as he peeled the tape back. The paper was a note. He unfolded it slowly, like the words might burn. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "If you found this, please don't throw it away. Please." Caleb stared at the sentence until his eyes blurred. He didn't know why his chest tightened so hard, but it did. Because there was something about that please that sounded like someone had been desperate. Someone had hidden this not for fun, not as a prank, but as a last option. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, and this time he pulled it out without thinking. A text from Jenna. Lila's school called. She had a panic episode in class. "I'm taking her home." Caleb's whole body went cold. He read it twice, like he'd misread it. Then he looked back at the note in his hand. He didn't know why, but in that moment, kneeling beside a fallen tree with a strange box and a desperate message, he felt like the world had tilted. Like two separate problems, his life falling apart and this hidden thing, had suddenly collided. Rick called again, impatient now. "Cal, everything okay?" Caleb couldn't answer. Not yet. He slid the note back into the box, hands shaking, and lifted it like it mattered. Because somehow, it did. And he had the terrifying feeling that whatever was inside wasn't just junk. It was a story. And it was about to pull him somewhere he didn't feel ready to go. Caleb didn't tell anyone about the box that day. He slid it behind the seat of his truck, under an old flannel and a pair of work gloves stiff with dried sap, like if he hid it well enough it wouldn't ask anything of him. He finished the shift on autopilot. He stacked, cut, signaled, nodded when Rick talked. His body knew the work even when his mind was somewhere else. The whole drive home, the box felt heavier than it should have. Every stoplight made him glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting someone to be following him for reasons he couldn't explain. He told himself he was being ridiculous. It was probably just some old stash someone forgot years ago. A prank. A time capsule. Something that had nothing to do with him. Still, when he pulled into his driveway, he didn't go inside right away. The rain had started again, light and steady. He sat in the truck, engine off, listening to drops tap the windshield. He thought about Lila. Panic episode. He pictured her small shoulders hunched, her fingers twisting the hem of her hoodie the way she did when she was overwhelmed. He hated that he wasn't there. He hated that he didn't know how to help even when he was. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail notification from a number he didn't recognize. Caleb frowned and played it. Hi, this is Marcy. I live on Pine Ridge Road. I think your mail got delivered to my box again. I've got a package here for you. Nothing urgent. Just wanted to let you know. Her voice was calm. Ordinary. The kind of voice that belonged to a person who wasn't constantly bracing for impact. Caleb almost deleted it. He didn't want to talk to anyone. But the idea of one more thing being unresolved made his chest tight. So he grabbed the box from behind the seat, tucked it under his arm without really thinking about why, and got back in the truck. Pine Ridge Road was only a few minutes away. Narrow, lined with trees and modest houses that looked like they'd been built in the same decade and then slowly aged in their own ways. Marcy's house had a small porch with wind chimes and a potted plant that somehow looked alive despite the weather. She answered the door in socks and a cardigan, holding his package like she'd been expecting him. She was maybe in her late 50s, hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her head. Caleb, right? She said, smiling gently. Your name was on the box. Yeah, he said, shifting his weight. Sorry about that. No problem at all. She handed it over, then paused, looking at the metal box under his other arm. You okay? The question caught him off guard. It wasn't nosy. It wasn't loaded. It was just human. Yeah, he said automatically. She nodded, but didn't push. Well, if you ever need anything, I'm usually home. I work remote. Too much time on my hands, honestly. Caleb almost laughed. Instead, he said, thanks. As he turned to leave, she added, my husband used to log. Before he passed. Caleb stopped. He always said the woods hold on to things, she continued, not dramatic, just stating a fact. Not just trees. Stories. Caleb's throat tightened. He nodded once, then left before she could see his face change. Back home, he set his mail on the counter and placed the metal box on the kitchen table. The room felt smaller with it there, like it was watching him. He made himself a sandwich he barely ate. He paced. He checked his phone. No updates from Jenna yet. His thoughts kept circling the same questions. Who hid this? Why in a tree? Why ask so plainly not to throw it away? Finally, he sat down and opened the box. Inside were old papers wrapped in plastic. A small notebook. A folded photograph. And a cheap prepaid phone, the kind you buy at a gas station. Caleb picked up the notebook first. The cover was soft, worn. Inside, the handwriting matched the note. Neat but uneven, like the writer's hand shook sometimes. The entries weren't dates. Just thoughts. I don't know how long I can keep doing this. I tried the shelter but I couldn't sleep. They don't see me anymore. Caleb read slowly, feeling like he was intruding, but unable to stop. The words were simple. Honest. Someone describing days spent invisible. Losing work. Losing connection. Losing faith that asking for help would actually help. One page stopped him cold. If someone finds this, I hope they're doing better than I was. If you are, please remember people don't disappear all at once. It happens a little at a time. Caleb closed the notebook and stared at the wall. His reflection in the dark window looked tired. Older than he felt. He thought about how often he told himself he was fine when he wasn't. How close fine sometimes felt to falling apart. His phone rang. Jenna. She's okay, she said before he could speak. The school counselor thinks it was stress. She asked for you. Caleb swallowed. I can come by. She said she just wanted to hear your voice, Jenna replied, softer now. She worries about you. After the call, Caleb sat back down at the table. He looked at the prepaid phone from the box. There was one contact saved. No name. Just a number. He stared at it for a long time. His finger hovered over the call button. He told himself it wasn't his responsibility. That this person's life wasn't his problem. That he had enough going on. But then he remembered Lila asking why he looked sad all the time. He remembered Marcy's quiet kindness. He remembered the line about people disappearing a little at a time. Caleb took a breath and pressed call. It rang twice. Hello. A man's voice answered, cautious, tired, very real. Caleb's heart pounded. Hi, he said, voice unsteady. I think I found something that belongs to you. There was a pause. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. You found the box, the man said. Caleb closed his eyes. Yeah, he replied. I did. And just like that, a stranger's life brushed against his, not with a miracle, not with a fix, but with a fragile human thread that could break if either of them pulled too hard. Caleb didn't sleep much after that call. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked softly with each turn, like it was counting time he couldn't afford to lose. The man's voice kept replaying in his head. Not dramatic. Not panicked. Just worn down in a way Caleb recognized too well. They hadn't talked long. The man hadn't wanted to. He'd only said his name was Aaron and that he wasn't ready to explain everything yet. He'd sounded embarrassed, like being found was worse than being lost. Before hanging up, he'd said one thing that stuck with Caleb more than anything else. I hid it there because trees don't ask questions. That sentence followed Caleb into the next morning, into the truck, into the woods. He worked slower than usual. Rick noticed but didn't comment. Everyone was tired. Everyone was dealing with something. That was the unspoken rule of the job. Around midday, Caleb's phone buzzed again. A text from Aaron. Didn't expect anyone to actually call. Sorry if I put something on you. Caleb stared at the message. His instinct was to downplay it. To say it was fine. To say he wasn't bothered. That reflex lived deep in him, built from years of not wanting to be a burden. Instead, he typed, You didn't. I just want to understand. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. I don't know how to explain without sounding pathetic, Aaron wrote. Caleb felt something tighten behind his ribs. He typed back, You don't have to explain today. There was no reply after that. And somehow, that felt heavier than if Aaron had said something awful. That evening, Caleb drove to Jenna's place to see Lila. She was quieter than usual, curled into the corner of the couch with her knees pulled up. When he hugged her, she held on longer than she used to. School feels loud lately, she said into his jacket. Caleb nodded, rubbing her back. Yeah. Life can get loud. She pulled back and studied his face, eyes too serious for 9 years old. You're still sad sometimes. He didn't deny it. He didn't correct her. He just said, Yeah, but I'm working on it. She seemed to accept that. Kids didn't need perfection. They needed honesty that didn't scare them. On the drive home, Caleb realized how close he'd come to teaching his daughter that being sad was something you hid. Something you ignored until it went away on its own. He wondered how many people had taught Aaron the same lesson. The next few days blurred together. Work. Sleep. Coffee. Silence. Aaron texted occasionally. Short messages. No details. Just enough to confirm he was still there. Then one night, close to midnight, Caleb's phone rang. Aaron didn't bother with a greeting. I'm sorry, he said, voice strained. I shouldn't have called. I just didn't know who else to talk to. Caleb sat up, heart racing. What's going on? A long pause. Then words spilled out, uneven and raw. Aaron had lost his job during a company restructure. Tech support. Nothing flashy. Just enough to get by. When the severance ran out, he fell behind. Rent first. Then utilities. Friends drifted when he stopped being able to show up like before. His family lived across the country, and he didn't want to worry them. He told himself he'd figure it out. He didn't. The box was supposed to be temporary. Important papers. Letters he never sent. Proof that he'd existed if he stopped being around. He'd hidden it during a camping trip years ago, back when things still felt fixable. When the tree was smaller. When he thought he'd come back for it. I kept telling myself I wasn't that bad, Aaron said quietly. But then days went by where no one said my name. Caleb pressed his thumb into the edge of the table, grounding himself. He recognized that moment. The one where pride and fear teamed up to convince you silence was safer than asking. You're not invisible, Caleb said, surprising himself with how firm his voice sounded. Aaron laughed weakly. You don't know me. I know the feeling, Caleb replied. And I know it lies. The call ended after that, not because everything was said, but because neither of them had the energy to keep digging. Caleb sat there long after, staring at the box on the table. He thought about how close Aaron had come to disappearing without drama, without headlines, without anyone noticing until it was too late. And he thought about himself. About the nights he ate standing up. The mornings he sat in his truck pretending he had somewhere else to be. The way he'd been shrinking his own life to avoid disappointment. The realization hit him hard and quiet. He wasn't just helping Aaron. He was looking at a version of himself he'd been carefully avoiding. That scared him more than the box ever had. The next day at work, Rick pulled him aside. You've been off, he said, not unkindly. You need time. Caleb almost said no. Almost defaulted to habit. Instead, he hesitated. Maybe a day. Rick nodded. Take it. Caleb sat in his truck afterward, hands on the wheel, breathing through the unfamiliar feeling of choosing himself without a crisis forcing it. He texted Aaron. I'm not a professional. I don't have answers. But I'm here. And there are places that help without judgment. If you want, I can sit with you while you call. Minutes passed. Then, I don't know if I deserve that. Caleb typed back slowly. Neither did I think I deserved a lot of things. That didn't make me wrong. He leaned back, exhausted, scared, but strangely steadier than he'd felt in months. The breaking point wasn't a single moment. It was the quiet understanding that pretending you're fine eventually costs more than admitting you're not. And once you saw that truth, you couldn't unsee it. Caleb took the day off and didn't try to fill it with productivity. That alone felt like progress. He made coffee at home instead of stopping at Starbucks, sat at the table, and let the quiet exist without fighting it. The box stayed where it was, not hidden anymore. He realized he didn't need to control it. He just needed to respond to what it represented. Around late morning, Aaron texted. I didn't sleep. Kept thinking about what you said. Caleb typed back, same. They met later that afternoon at a public library in town. Neutral ground. Bright windows. A place where people came to look for answers without having to explain why. Caleb spotted Aaron by the reading tables. He was thinner than Caleb expected, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded together like he was afraid of taking up too much space. They shook hands, then awkwardly sat. For a moment, neither spoke. I didn't think you'd actually show, Aaron said finally, not accusatory, just honest. Me neither, Caleb replied. They talked in pieces. No big confessions. No dramatic turns. Just facts layered with pauses. Aaron had been staying in short-term rentals when he could afford them, then on couches, then nowhere consistent. He wasn't asking for money. He made that clear twice, like he needed Caleb to believe him. Caleb listened more than he talked. He noticed how Aaron avoided eye contact when he spoke about family. How his voice steadied when he talked about small things he liked, walking trails, fixing old electronics, black coffee with too much sugar. Caleb shared a little too. About Lila. About the divorce. About waking up tired before the day even started. He didn't frame it as advice. He just let it be true. When they left the library, it was raining again, soft and steady. They stood under the awning for a second, watching people hurry by. I don't know what happens next, Aaron said. Caleb nodded. Me neither. That was the strange comfort of it. Neither of them was pretending anymore. Over the next few weeks, things didn't magically improve. Aaron made calls that went to voicemail. He sat through intake appointments that felt impersonal and slow. Caleb went back to work, still tired, still stressed, still figuring things out. Lila had another rough day at school, then a better one. Life moved in uneven lines. But small things shifted. Caleb started eating dinner sitting down. Not every night, but enough to notice. He stopped keeping his phone on silent. He texted Jenna updates instead of waiting for problems to come to him. He told Rick when he needed time instead of pushing through until his hands shook. Aaron found a temporary job fixing equipment at a community center. It wasn't permanent. It didn't solve everything, but it gave him a routine. A reason to shower in the morning. A place where someone said his name and expected him to show up. One evening, Caleb helped Aaron move his box, what was left of his past, from Caleb's truck into a small storage unit the community center helped arrange. When the door rolled down, Aaron stood there longer than necessary. I thought losing this would mean losing proof I mattered, Aaron said quietly. Turns out carrying it around was keeping me stuck. Caleb understood that. He thought about the things he'd been dragging with him, invisible weights he'd mistaken for responsibility. They didn't become best friends. They didn't talk every day. That wasn't realistic. But they checked in. They showed up when it mattered. They learned the difference between saving someone and standing beside them. Months later, Caleb drove past the ridge where the tree had stood. The stump was still there, weathered now, blending back into the land. If you didn't know what had been hidden inside it, you'd never guess. That felt right. On a Wednesday night, Lila fell asleep on his couch during a movie, her head heavy on his shoulder. Caleb didn't move. He let the moment be imperfect and complete at the same time. He thought about how close he'd come to ignoring the lump, to cutting the tree, clearing the job, and driving home without ever knowing. How easy it was to miss quiet signals when you were focused on surviving. Life didn't fix itself, but it responded when he did. Sometimes help didn't arrive as a miracle. Sometimes it showed up as a strange interruption. A conversation you almost avoided. A choice to listen instead of rushing past. Caleb turned off the TV, careful not to wake Lila, and sat there in the dim light. He felt tired. Still human. Still figuring it out. But not alone in the way he once was. And he knew now that when something felt wrong, when a lump didn't belong, you didn't have to solve everything. You just had to stop long enough to notice. If this story connected with you, or if you've ever had a moment that quietly changed your direction, share it. Someone out there might need to hear it more than you think.